podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Welcome back to Humans of Speedway, where in each episode we talk to some of the people who make up the sport, not just on the track, but off it too. I'm Ian Brannan. My next guest in this episode has been described by others to me as possibly the most influential man in British Speedway over the years. This is the story of Peter Oakes, an award-winning Fleet Street journalist as his day job, but also went way beyond just reporting on Speedway. He became firmly a part of it, working on PR for clubs, becoming a promoter, a team manager, and the personal manager and best friend of one of the sport's greatest ever riders, Ivan Mauger. So we're going to find out a little bit more about all of that and some stories about his time with Ivan and much more besides. And before the end of this show, Peter is going to harness all of that knowledge from his life in Speedway to create his Speedway Paradise, his all-time team at the all-time venue, and some tweaks to the rulebook in there for good measure as well. There's so many great stories all the way through, so settle yourself in as we say welcome to Humans of Speedway, Peter Oakes.
Thank you. Nice to be talking to you, Ian.
Just wanted to start in the present, really. Obviously, no news really from on track, but plenty off it that you've been reporting on, particularly in the Daily Star and the Speedway Star, about the resurgence of a few clubs, including Southampton and I think most notably Bradford. Do you have any update for Bradford Dukes fans listening on the chances of their club making a comeback?
Yeah, Bradford in particular, that had a long chat to Steve Rees, who's the potential stock car promoter there, and he was very confident. Not just confident, he was very confident that he seemed to have all the right signs and all the right signals from the Rugby Football League, who own the long-term 120-year lease or something of that ilk for Odsal. So, if those negotiations continued as successfully as they'd started, I would have put it, maybe 70, 80%.
Wow.
We will see Bradford back. Of course, he's then got to find, a Speedway promoter willing to take the chance on Bradford, but I think he will probably manage that.
I mean, for me particularly, I sort of grew up being a Halifax and a Bradford fan, and obviously it was such a weird situation to find that they go and win the league and then they immediately have to close down with this promise of reopening in the Superdome, as it was at the time, and obviously that never happened. And I think to finally get a track back in there would be amazing for the sport in the north in general, but obviously particularly in Yorkshire with the rivalries between Bellevue and Sheffield as well.
Bradford was always a terrific venue, wasn't it? And it just seemed, as you say, for it to happen after they'd won the league. But same thing happened at Workington a couple of years ago, didn't it?
Yeah.
They swept the board in the championship. Next season they don't run, and I think there are too many. Going back to the 70s, London White City, they won the league and then never ran the next season. And that's very sad, isn't it? You can't really imagine that happening in football, or, where sort of Liverpool next season don't operate because they're having won the league this season, and it's just so sad. That, perhaps it reflects that maybe that those clubs spent too much money to win the league. You don't really know, do you, what was the full background to it all? The other one, Southampton, is a difficult one. It's a group of enthusiasts. They're looking initially to build a track to have amateur racing on, but that if they get a track, you cannot see a situation where there isn't a promoter who comes along and said, "Oh look, I'd like to run league racing in Southampton." So they're talking very long term. They're talking about 2023 at the earliest. But it would be terrific, wouldn't it, to get two such big tracks in big cities, which is what Speedway needs, doesn't it? It needs to get more and more cities involved, and of course the absolute dream would be to find somewhere again in London, which I think is one of the biggest problems Speedway's probably faced over the years, the declining and now complete decimation of any circuits in London, because that's still the heart of media, isn't it? And if something is happening in London, then newspapers will pay far more attention.
Yeah, absolutely, and especially if you could get it into one of the larger stadiums that already exist in some way as well.
Yeah, the obvious dream would be the new Tottenham Hotspur Stadium in London. That the actual what would have been the old-fashioned head groundsman, but is now, sort of director of facilities and all sorts of things, is actually a very, very big Speedway fan. And I would imagine you've got far more chance of getting a Speedway in where the person who'd be responsible for the football pitch and everything surrounding it is a Speedway fan. So that is a little dream that I have, that that someone can go along and maybe in future look at a Grand Prix there. I don't really see you could have league racing at a stadium that big, but a Grand Prix, I think that would be a possibility, but down the road.
Turning to your story then, Peter, and you have had such a long history with the sport. Your entire life really has been entwined in Speedway, both initially as a fan and, of course, a reporter, a promoter, a team manager. You were the manager of perhaps the greatest ever rider, Ivan Mauger. But what are your earliest memories going back to the 1950s in Liverpool and first taking in some Speedway?
I don't really remember too much about the very early days, which would have been sometime in the 50s. I'm not really certain whether it was sort of 56 when I would have been 12. So that was most likely when Liverpool was run by an ex-rider called Reg Duval, who he ran a series of open meetings at Liverpool under the Chad's name. My parents had a pet shop on a road called Rocky Lane. And probably 300 yards further down the road, there was a motorcycle showroom or motorcycle repair shop run by somebody called Charlie Oates. Now, Charlie was an ex-Speedway rider who rode for Liverpool. And he had this workshop, and Peter Craven used his workshop. He worked on his bikes in there during the season. This would be early 60s, late 50s maybe, early 60s. And I used to walk down there and walk in, and they used to let me sit and watch Peter Craven while he was working on his bike. And they used to have to cut their tyres in those days. They would get a tyre which they literally had to scoop out the rubber so that they would get knobbles on it. Mm-hmm. And as a kid, I would watch Peter Craven doing this. I understand, although I'm not 100% certain, that Peter Craven actually took me to my first Speedway meeting. And
wow.
took me across the park. That wasn't quite as sort of obscure as strange it may seem, because my father worked at an engineering company in Everton Valley, which was near the Everton and Liverpool football grounds. And one of his work colleagues, 52 weeks of the year, was Brian Craven, who was Peter Craven's elder brother. And every winter, if he wasn't racing in South Africa, Peter Craven would also go and spend the winter working there. The only real memory I have of prior to 1960 was being stood behind a red brick wall, which in fact encircled the Greyhound track, with the Speedway track also in the same situation. I can recall that because I can certainly remember a rider called Tommy Murphy, who was a second halfer, no more than that. Not very good, he kept falling off. And that he got to such a stage that in one meeting, they had a diagram in the programme which you literally had to mark X, which instead of spot the ball, it was X where Tommy Murphy will fall off tonight, which I thought was an absolute great stunt by the promoter. I've also got I'm glad that's tickled you.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Why don't we do that more?
I've also got a recollection of him having a rocket-powered bike, in which was basically, a couple of rocket fireworks, attached to either side of the back wheel, and him going on the track on this bike. They are my earliest memories. I know they are true because I've researched it since, and these things 100% happened. But my first real recollection was in 1959/1960 when Mike Parker, in 59, he ran a number of composite meetings at Liverpool, which would be midget cars and Speedway. And the Speedway appeared to be the popular part of that particular show that he put on. So he and Reg Fearman opened Liverpool in 1960, when they rode, strangely enough, and I still can't understand why, as Liverpool Pirates. Liverpool's tradition is they had this very unusual nickname in the 40s, all the post-war era, which was the Chads, which was a cartoon character that was in all the papers at the time in connection with the war. And the Chads became totally synonymous with Speedway in Liverpool. If you spoke to anyone and said, "Oh, did you go to the Chads?" They would all say, "Yeah, we went to the Chads." And for some reason, Mike decided that he would change the nickname and call them the Pirates, even though at the same time Pool Pirates were still operating. The difference, even instead of using blue, which was Pool Pirates, he had red with a white pirate skull and crossbones. I can remember going there because I'd have been in 60, I'd have been 15/16 in my last year at school. And I joined the supporters club, and the supporters club used to have a meeting at a pub opposite the stadium on the opposite side of the road. And I went there and attended various supporters functions. I left school in 1960, probably would be July, wouldn't it, when everybody broke up, and then got a job on a local newspaper, which was called the St. Helens Reporter, which was based in St. Helens, which is probably 20 miles from Liverpool. But they also had a district newspaper called the Huyton and Prescott Reporter. And I can remember persuading the sports editor. I wasn't on sport, I was on news when I joined the paper, but I persuaded the sports editor that I could cover Liverpool Speedway for them. Because Huyton and Prescott, very much, Huyton, a suburb of Liverpool's where Stephen Gerrard was born and lived, and Prescott was probably 5 miles further away. So this was quite I was delighted at this thought that there I was, I'd be writing about Liverpool as a 16-year-old. But Liverpool closed down at the end of 1960. So I never ever did write about Liverpool at all because there was no Liverpool to write about. But I got friendly with a part-time journalist called Frank McLean, who was quite a bit older than me, but Frank had been around for a long time. He was very, very close to Peter Craven and had covered Liverpool for the Liverpool Echo, Liverpool Daily Post, almost from the opening up after the Second World War. And, Frank, I don't know, to some extent took a journalistic shine to me that there was this sort of keen young man who wanted to write about Speedway. And we started going from Liverpool. He lived in Liverpool, literally opposite Anfield. So we didn't live that far away. And he suggested did I want to go to Bellevue? So I went to Bellevue with him. I used to get the bus into Liverpool city centre. Frank at the time didn't drive, so we'd go to the station in Liverpool. We'd get the train to Manchester. We'd get off, and they used to then have special buses going to Bellevue from the Manchester city centre. So it was quite easy to come out of the station, walk probably 100, 200 yards at the most, grab the old Speedway specials. So I was really, my first real involvement with Speedway was at Bellevue. And that lasted. We'd go to Bellevue. When I was old enough to drive, I got a car, and I'd take Frank then, or vice versa. He decided to get a car, and we'd take it in turns of driving to Manchester and watch Bellevue every week, and go there every Saturday night. The occasional midweek matches. And that was really how I got involved. But I lived in Manchester. That Mike Parker then asked me to do a little bit of PR for him. I was actually, strangely enough, because of talking to you, Ian, I did all the press for the opening of Halifax in, 1964? I can remember sort of organising that when there were people like Brian Elliott, I think, was in the team, Bob Jameson, Eric Bucock, obviously, Eric Boothroyd. And, that got me into a little bit doing extra PR work for Speedway, and that developed from there. I wrote and edited a little monthly magazine for Mike Parker, again at one stage. And, my sort of my proper journalistic career saw me move. I moved around quite a bit very early on. That I think I only stayed on the local paper for a year or so. But I carried on, writing about Speedway, and I did my first article for Speedway Star in 1962, and have basically been working for them, ever since.
It started out as almost a hobby in some respects, and obviously a passion of yours that you wanted to carry on. But your main career, you were a proper Fleet Street reporter.
I joined the People, or the Sunday People, in 1965. So I went down and lived in London. My wife and I, we got married in the April of 65. I joined us literally 3 days later. I joined the People in London, and we actually stayed in a flat that was owned by a rider, an Australian international called Ray Cresp, who is obviously a bit before your time. But Ray had this 3-story house in Selhurst in Sydenham, just opposite Crystal Palace. Mm-hmm. And Pam and I, we had lived on one floor. Ray and his wife lived on another floor. And in the third floor was another rider called Trevor Bloddick, who was a South African who rode for Ipswich at the time. And Trevor was also, or he actually stopped Speedway to become a motor racer, and raced in Formula One. He only did, I think he did about 3 F1 GPs. But that again cemented my Speedway. And while I was in London, I'd go to all the London tracks. I was then moved by other people to Cardiff, and to be the Welsh news reporter. And obviously that was still close enough to Speedway, which was Newport.
Yes.
So I never had a spell where I couldn't go to Speedway, because everywhere I moved, and I did move quite a lot, there was a Speedway relatively close.
It was in this era, in the 1960s, when you struck up a friendship with one Ivan Mauger, who was already a big star but not a world champion at this stage. How did you two first make contact and become friends?
In 63, I first met Ivan. Neither of us can actually remember the circumstances, but all I can remember was that his wife, Ray, I was living in the Hull site in Diggs at the time, and I can remember Ray saying to me, look, you must come and have Sunday lunch with us. There I was, a 18-year-old, living away from home, and what you sort of like at that age. You don't exactly have the best things to eat, and you don't have your Sunday lunch or no matter. But Ray asked me to go for Sunday lunch. I'll never forget it, because Sunday lunch was a curry.
Of course.
But they lived then at Upper Chorlton Road, which is was in a very poor district of Manchester, in Moss Side. And these are all the houses that were owned by Mike Parker, who was, if the truth be known, a bit of a rackman. That he bought all old houses. He didn't do them up. He just basically rented them out. But he also provided these houses for all his riders. He had a lot of Australian and New Zealand riders who would come over, and they would all literally live next door to each other in this little enclave in Upper Chorlton Road. All sorts of names. Goog Allen lived there, Graham Coombs lived there, Bruce Ovenden lived there, Gary Peterson, the late Gary Peterson, who was killed at Wolverhampton, he lived there. Murray Burt, who was another New Zealander. Jim Airy, obviously the great Australian. Gordon Glasgow was another Australian. Every rider that Parker brought in to Britain lived there. Toby Harrison, Swedish rider, lived there, and that was where Ollie Olsen first lived when he first came over to ride for Newcastle.
Wow, what a street!
Well, it wasn't even a street; it was 3 houses, literally.
Blimey.
So I would go to the houses, and obviously I would then spend all my spare time chatting to all these riders, and getting the stories and features about them. If I look back at sort of 63, 64, the Speedway Star would have a feature almost every week that I'd written, which was nearly always about one of these riders who were living in these houses because you could go and see them.
I bet you wish it was still like that in some ways. It's so easy to just go and track them down, whereas now they're jetting here, there and everywhere. It's completely different days.
Yeah, the only thing that today has, at least, is mobile phones.
Yes.
That if you bear in mind, like in the 60s, there were no such things as mobile phones. And very few of the riders, or certainly not the riders who came over from Australia and New Zealand, because they were always living on virtually nothing. They didn't even have landlines, so you couldn't phone them. But I had this great advantage of actually seeing them all on a regular basis. And some really nice stories from those days. I can remember Jim Airy and Gordon Glasgow, who were really great mates and travelled everywhere together. Just being like sort of school kids when it snowed on what must have been a March or possibly even as late as April. And they literally had never seen snow in their lives. And you can imagine that they suddenly see this snow. They'd obviously heard about it, but never seen it. And they really were like a couple of 8 or 9 year olds wanted to go and throw snowballs at each other.
Fantastic.
A lot of fun. And, Ivan or Ray was the matriarch of them all, that Ray looked after all of them. And they obviously all went to Ivan for their advice. They all shared workshops. And then the other great thing that sort of taught me, you wouldn't take a dog into these houses. The estates, I'm not saying that they weren't dirty because they were looked after by the people in there, but they were really run down houses. And you look there and you see the actual background of the riders who went on to be very famous riders. In particular, Ivan and Ollie both went on to win world titles, and you can understand how they kept their feet on the ground and how they were so determined and so ambitious and so hardworking, because they literally pulled themselves up from what were basically in a slum area. Mm-hmm. As I said, the houses weren't, because the rooms were beautifully kept and everything, but it's really, I think it is nice to actually look back and see that these people never changed.
You're listening to Humans of Speedway. I'm Ian Brannan. My guest in this episode is Peter Oakes, who through his entire life has been involved with Speedway, really. Author, journalist, promoter, team manager. And before the end of this podcast, he's going to be putting together his all-time dream meeting, harnessing all of that experience. So can't wait to find out what he's going to come up with before the end of the podcast. Right now, I want to get back to Ivan Mauger, because you were great friends with him. But how did that go from being just a casual friendship to actually going into business together? Because you were his personal manager.
It obviously started from that Sunday curry. And I don't know, we just sort of hit it off. At the time, I wasn't married, but my girlfriend was Pam, and she just hit it off with Ivan's wife, Ray. Because, we became very close friends, and we would go out in an evening together. We'd go off to see a show or things like that. And I can't even remember when we first decided that we'd set up a company. Between the four of us, we all became four directors of a company called Projector Sport Limited, which handled all Ivan's media appearances, media columns. We started writing columns for, initially, I think the first one was probably the Speedway Star, but as it moved on, I would ghostwrite all these columns. We'd do it for evening newspapers. We'd arrange for him to appear on radio on quite regularly on the BBC, on the radio, things like Blue Peter, Later Days, Question of Sport. We just basically hit it off, and I've always said to anyone who's asked, well, how come you got on so well with him? And I firmly believe it is because one reason is that I had absolutely no mechanical knowledge at all. I don't know anything about Speedway engines. I have absolutely no desire to know anything about Speedway engines. It doesn't interest me in the slightest. And I could go along and I would sit in the workshop talking to Ivan while he and his team were working on engines and doing whatever they did. And I think Ivan always felt totally confident that even on the week of the world final, I could sit there and I wouldn't have the slightest clue what he was doing. So I could never, ever give away any mechanical secrets. Ivan would have denied all that and said he never even thought of it. But I still have that little thing at the back of my mind. I think it probably helped that he knew I could never, ever go away and give away any of his workshop secrets.
And I guess you could never question him on what he was doing on that front as well, like, say, versus an ex-rider might.
No, I could never turn around and say, "Oh, well, why are you putting those handlebars on?" or "Why are you putting red tape on the throttle twist grip rather than blue tape or white tape?" Never ever could I ask him. All I'd ask him would be, we'd just be talking as you talk with a mate, and we went on holidays together. And when I moved down to London after I was only a year in Wales, in Cardiff, and then I moved back to London on the paper for the London office. And if Ivan was down in London or off to an airport, he would stay with us, and we just became very, very, very close. And my daughter got on with Ivan's children, and certainly with the two daughters. She was sort of bridesmaid for the eldest daughter, Julie. And we went on holiday with each other. We go down. I remember one great one when we went to Cornwall to a place called St Agnes, which was a beautiful little village on the Cornish coast. And we were on the beach one day, and a little boy came up to Ivan and sort of said, "Oh, are you Ivan Mauger?" And he probably regretted it afterwards. Ivan turned around and said, "No."
Oh no!
Because we treated it was a break. We didn't want to be involved in any speedway. We were just out there as a family, and I could always wonder whether Ivan later on thought, "Oh, I wish I'd have sort of said yes to that poor little lad." But, so if he's still around somewhere, an apology on behalf of Ivan.
Yeah, if you ever had that sort of wonder in your mind, then yes, it definitely was him. When you look back at your time with Ivan, and obviously these are rich times, and maybe I'm leaping ahead slightly here, what's your sort of favourite story or memory with Ivan that you look back on and maybe smile the most?
Probably the one that I smiled the most was a world final at Gothenburg, where Ivan was very much a loner in his preparation for a world final. In the days and the weeks leading up to a world final, he'd become very, very insular, very much in a zone, get a bit quite ratty. Like he would have a go at people. We often sort of said, Ray's life, his wife's life was hell during the week of a world final. And he also, we would never go into a hotel where the other riders were, because he didn't want to be mixing with them. He wanted to be on his own, do his own thing. And we went to Gothenburg for this world final, and we're out got a hotel in the woods, and we sort of settled in the hotel, and then all of a sudden, through the doors, who should come but Dave Lanning and the entire World of Sport team. So, and the thought that there we were trying to keep away from everybody, and in comes the man who, Dave, absolutely larger than life, a wonderful personality. "Oh, what are you doing here?" So, that was one of the funny ones. Another one which I wasn't actually totally privy to what happened, but I think we were in Denmark, and the intention was that we were going to come back. The meeting was probably I'd be either a Saturday or a Sunday, and we were going to come back. But Ivan decided that he wasn't going to come back. He was going to do another meeting over there, or going to come back by car. So he told Ray and Pam, "Look, we're not coming back. We'll come back later." So this caused, as you can imagine, some fury amongst the two women. So Ray decided, right, I'll show you. So she went and booked on the ferry to go from what would it have been Eschberg probably, back, or it might even be in Gothenburg, straight from Gothenburg. Anyway, she booked on the ferry, but it was full. So that gave her a sight problem, but she asked, are you sure it's full? And they said, oh, well, no, the only room that we have, or the only cabins we have, are the Queen's suite. Right. And that was literally the suite that the Queen used. So
okay.
They said, we'll have it.
Oh, man.
So Aaron Power sort of trundled in and had the absolute luxurious trip back on this ferry. And it was an overnight ferry, so, and it was all, I think also it was sort of champagne on Ivan all the time. She said, I'll make him pay for this, So heaven knows what the bill was, but that, it's also, it's a side of Ivan that sort of people never saw. And I did a little thing on, I think, Facebook the other day saying, out of these 10 people, who have I never had a drink with? And you'd be amazed that I would say 50-60% of the people who answered said Ivan Mauger, which sort of astounded me because, Ivan wasn't teetotal. Ivan enjoyed a drink when he wasn't racing. Out of the season, he'd be the first to start drinking. He'd be dancing on tables. But this was a side that not even his rivals ever saw. They didn't know about. And several riders from the time actually said, oh, it'll be Ivan Mauger that you've never had a drink with. And to give you an idea that the other people included people like Princess Anne, to name drop.
Yeah. We can hear them clanging in there.
Yeah, Richard Harris, Roger Moore, who was James Bond, amongst other things. Because my later career journalistically was showbiz, writing about showbiz and television. So there were all these sort of big names that I'd been out and had lunch with. And there was the one that, I'm trying to think, I can't remember who the one I said that, who I hadn't been out for a drink. I know sort of Jimi Hendrix was on the list. And yet all these people thought that the one I hadn't ever had a drink with was Ivan, because they thought it was a trick and that Ivan never drank. So it was just nice to know the other side of a person, because he was, without doubt, he was my best friend. We used to speak when he was over here. We would speak literally every other day, and even when he retired and went back to Australia, we'd still speak at least every couple of weeks, maybe more frequent. So it was a friendship that lasted, and the friendship with the family lasts today. We're still in regular touch with each other. We've been Zooming each other, during the pandemic, and it's been such a, we all make special friends, don't we, in our lives, and that was very much a special friend. And we probably only had maybe one or two fallouts the whole of the time, and it was it was good to be able to also share the some of the success that he had over the years, and to think I played a part in it. Like our financially, our arrangement was always that we split everything. There was never any suggestion of any other way of doing it. That there were four of us who were directors, and we each took 25% of whatever we made out of it all. And
it's really great.
And Ivan was always totally trustworthy with what I did, from the columns I would write for him. But good times.
And Ivan also trusted you with helping him out with the contract details when they came up, sorting out his terms. And I want to delve into the details of an Ivan Mauger contract, because he had some particular demands that actually got approved by the BSPA. Take note, riders of today. Ivan had a deal with Exeter that he would only ride home meetings.
Ourselves and Newcastle, Ian Thomas, had been asked to, the promoters wanted us to go into the first division. We both agreed. We were both told that we would get help with building a team, that they'd ensure that we got access to to riders, that and it just didn't work out that way, that we couldn't find because there were now extra teams coming into the top flight, there wasn't an abundance. There was a shortage of riders, and riders just didn't want to go down to Exeter. That Exeter was a very sort of different track. It had this, in many ways, this horrid steel fence. It was banked, it was fast, it was relatively narrow. And riders, very few riders actually lived in the West Country. They nearly all lived in the Midlands or the North. And they wouldn't come down. And I can remember just talking to Ivan one day and saying, "Oh, look, would you come and ride us for a season?" And he said, "No, the only way I'll do it is if I just ride home meetings." So we thought, well, nothing ventured, nothing gained. We applied to the BSPA, and lo and behold, they agreed to it. So, we actually saw him then in his final season in Britain. That it wasn't a successful season. We had, the crowds just didn't respond because of our results. The same, Newcastle had similar problems, and it was another case of where promoters, had made promises which they didn't keep, and as a result, they lost 2 tracks as a result of it. As far as racing in the first division was concerned, although Exeter did then carry on in the second division. But I don't think neither of us thought he would ride for Exeter. I'd been trying all sorts of people. Originally, was hoping that he would agree to do a full season home and away, but that wasn't on his agenda. Ivan's contract with Exeter, he insisted on having a private aeroplane, pick him up from the airport and fly him down to Exeter. He didn't always stick to that, particularly after the pilot had actually crashed a plane when Ivan wasn't in it, and he started to sort of allow to be picked up by car and taken down to Exeter. He also demanded that got rid of a lot of the green on the Exeter race jackets because he considered green unlucky.
Right.
He never ever demanded to be at number 1. Ever. I know some riders would do. That was in the days, if you remember, you could ride anywhere in the team. Mm-hmm. He also had the rights to all the photographs that were image rights, you'd call them today. He was probably the first Speedway rider to have image rights. That was also in his contract. Quite a lot of things. But none of them, you wouldn't look at them and say, "Oh, they're terribly outrageous," because he produced the goods.
You're listening to Humans of Speedway. My guest is Peter Oakes, and as you've just heard there, former manager of Ivan Mauger, but also Speedway author and journalist, team promoter, team manager, and he's going to be using all of those skills in just a bit to put together his dream meeting. Speedway Paradise, we call it. But anyway, more about that to come. Peter, you got involved in promoting actual Speedway teams. That must have been quite a difference of pace of life for you, from spending time watching it to then actually becoming involved in running a club.
Yeah, very much so. That the first track I was promoter at, although I wasn't in name, because the Speedway Control Board, didn't think I was a suitably fit and proper person to be a promoter, because I was a journalist, believe it or not.
How dare they?
It was Barrow.
Yeah.
That we agreed a deal to open Barrow, agreed it with the football club. That was Wally Maudsley, who was a recognised promoter, Ivan and myself. We were 3-way partners in Barrow. So that was the first experience. We only did that for a year, and basically the travelling. I was living in London. Wally was living in London in Upminster in Essex, and Ivan was obviously still this was 1972, so he was still heavily involved in racing, and we just couldn't cope with the travelling. That I was on the People at the time, and Barrow we ran on Tuesday nights, or had to run on Tuesday nights. When we took over West Ham's licence, West Ham closed down, and we took over the licence. Barrow were running open meetings at the time, so we had to keep the Tuesday race day. And I was sort of travelling up to Barrow on a Tuesday and having to be in the office at the People first thing Wednesday morning. And, it just proved impossible. You absolutely wreck, because those days, travelling, leaving Barrow, say, 10, 11 o'clock at night and getting home 3 or 4 in the morning, and then being up again at 7 or 8 to get ready to catch the train into London. wasn't the best of lives. So we sold Barrow, but then I became co-promoter with Wally Maudsley at Exeter in 1980. Again, Wally had struggled with crowds in the late 70s, and we decided to apply for Exeter to join the second division, and I had 4 years there, 81 to 84. That's 80 to 84, so that's 5 years, which was quite enjoyable. Except again, going into the first division in 84, just hemorrhaged money. It all just became too much, and you get to the stage where you become very close to a breakdown, because you're hit by both all the travel and also you're losing money on a speedway track. I then didn't get involved in promoting until 1992, which was then with a friend of mine, James Easter. James contacted me, rang me up and sort of said, do you fancy running a track at Blackpool? And I don't know why I said yes. So we both went up to Blackpool. We agreed a deal with the Greyhound owners of the stadium just off the seafront, a few hundred yards from the tower. We were all well set to start 92 at Blackpool with the Blackpool whatevers. I can't even remember if we decided on a nickname for them. But then the council turned down the planning. They'd given us every indication and given the Greyhound owners every indication that planning would sail through. It didn't. And then all of a sudden an opportunity came to, I'm not to say take over, because Peterborough had closed and wasn't active. And we were someone suggested from the BSPA, look, why don't you go and run Peterborough? I was living at Warrington at the time, but James was in Ipswich, so we agreed, good idea. We will resurrect, we will revive, we will save Peterborough. And we did that in 92, and I stayed there, first of all with James, and latterly on my own as promoter, until the end of 97, when I had another disastrous season. That 96 had the best Speedway, financially the best season I'd ever had in Speedway. And when we had a team that finished second in the first division, when it was the two leagues combined, if you remember, in 95. Yeah. And ran in 95 and 96. We had an absolutely brilliant young team. We finished second, made a lot of money. And then foolishly decided that I would open a track at Skegness. But I don't know, like Blackpool, should have steered clear of holiday resorts.
Yeah, well, that's it. You seem to be trying to get Speedway to the coast.
Yeah, I can always remember, and I ignored the advice of Reg Fearman, who said the thing that you should never do is never open a track unless it's got houses on all four sides. By that he meant never open it where one is on the coast. And it isn't bad advice when you sort to... Poole is probably the only one that you could say has been successful over the years, being on the coast in a holiday resort.
You've been quite instrumental in finding some new talent into Speedway and bringing them into clubs, particularly at Peterborough, where you worked with the youth setup. You must be very proud to see how some of your finds have got on in the sport.
Yeah, very much so. That I've always been a believer in youth. Even at sort of Barrow, one of the first rider we had who was only 15 at the time and wasn't, because at that time you had to be 16 to race competitively, was Joe Owen. We took Joe Owen in. We'd signed Tom Owen for his first club. Joe, his brother, would come along with him, and he'd have rides, and we included him in everything. We had sponsorship deals with Duckham's Oil and also Premier Helmets, and part of those deals were that Joe Owen, who was 15-year-old, that he would get a helmet, he would get the oil and whatever. And Joe came up, he painted the pits along with other people. And, he was probably the first. When I went down to Exeter, the first in 1980, the team I tracked had, I think, 4 or 5 teenagers in it. People like, believe it or not, Alan Rossiter. He was in it. Martin Hewlett, a young lad called Keith Millard, who went on to win the British Under-21 Championship. I always believed in youth. I think I did also, journalistically when I became a sports editor. I brought young people onto the staff. Possibly because I had encouragement from Frank McLean. When I was only 16 or 17, and I think maybe that sticks with you if you know that you've had someone who's had faith in you and has encouraged you and has helped you and advised you. And the great thing about the really young ones is that they never give you any trouble. All they want to do is to go out and ride. You come back to Peterborough that we started off with, say, with Paul Hurry, who was 17, Jason Crump, who was 16, and in 1996 we had a junior team which included David Howe, Simon Stead, Oliver Allen, Ross Brady. I think it was the youngest ever championship winning side Speedway has ever seen, bar none. Despite some of the clubs claiming this was genuinely the youngest, and they were absolutely terrific because those kids, all they wanted to do was to race their motorbikes. It didn't matter what the conditions were like, they just wanted to get out and race their motorbikes. They were only getting, I think what it was, £10 a point and 10p a mile for their travel, but never ever asked for any. We never paid any extra. But I'd like to think that they all learned so much from that, because we would put the juniors on. When we were in I think it might have been called the Youth Development League then, we got permission from the control board to put the first 6 heats of the junior match on before the start of the Elite League match. So we would instead of starting at 7:30, we'd start at 7 o'clock, do half an hour of the youth development, do some track grading, run the whole of the Elite League match, and then run the remainder of the youth development match. So what all those riders did was they learnt to ride on tracks that were gripping.
Mm-hmm.
Not at the end when they were like concrete roads. And I think that helped the likes of David Howe, Steady, Ollie Allen, all go on. And Carl Wilkinson was another one. And you look, I sort of get a lot out of looking and seeing how long their careers were.
And still going.
Still going.
You've got the Great Britain team management in that team.
Yeah. Well, we've got both of them. We've got they are joint, and having signed for us as again a lovely story. I can remember that we paid when they signed professional to race for us in the Premier League. That those 3 of them were all offered exactly the same deal. We got each of them a sponsorship for £3,000 from different sponsors, and we paid them exactly the same points money. And I took each one of them and their parents for a meal at there's a Harvester type of restaurant just outside the East of England showground. I took them all there for a meal and to try and persuade them, because remember that they weren't actually under contract when they were in the Conference League in those days. At the end of the year, mm-hmm. they could have walked away and gone somewhere else. But in particular, I can remember that he talked to them all. I did all the deals with the 3 of them. But when Ollie Allen and his dad walked out with me, they just I think Dave just turned around to me and said, I shouldn't really tell you now, but we'd have signed no matter what you offered.
And it cost you a meal at the Harvester.
Yeah, plus all the rest of it. But I'm sort of, my grandson who used to travel with me everywhere, Josh Gudgeon, that he became, now he's sort of great mates. They used to sort of, he was, what is he now? He was probably 5-6 years younger than them, but they really took to him. They take him around on their shoulders on sort of parades, and now they're all sort of great mates. Like Josh introduced Simon to his wife when Josh was at university in Sheffield. So it's so lovely to see that, from those beginnings in '96, the friendships that have built up.
Wow, it's a really nice story. And one other thing that to talk about is your time at Coventry, because I spoke earlier, I think the very first episode I did was with Scott Nichols, and he was talking about the very special time that you had at Coventry where you were, winning everything, really. And I think he was saying there that the team, it was so easy to be part of that team because everybody was a captain, and, the whole thing just ran itself.
It was a very sort of totally out of the blue that I was asked to go to Coventry. That Colin Pratt, who I'd known Colin since '65, at Hackney when I was in London. I got to know him. We lived probably 3 miles apart on the Herts-Essex border, and I got to know Colin quite well. And we remained friendly all the time. And he just rang me up and said, "Oh, would you be interested that Mr. Sandu, who was the owner of Coventry, wants me to have someone with me to look after the team, and he's got someone in mind, but I fear that if this person comes, he will take over my job." So I said, yeah, I'll come and do it, and because I trust Colin 100%. He's the straightest guy you could ever meet in this world. What he says is what he does. And we just had a sort of terrific relationship. That he would leave me alone on race night. I would sometimes, I quite like having a sounding board and being able to go to someone and say, "Look, I'm thinking of doing this. What do you think?" And they can sometimes, spot something that you haven't done. Like I always had it when I was a promoter. I never ever team managed as well, except for the young team. Mm-hmm. I did the Thundercats because, when was it? Most of the time at Peterborough we had Kevin Hawkins as the team manager, because I don't believe that it is right for a promoter to be team manager, and one reason is that riders who are picked for, say, Heat 15, it's an extra ride for them, an extra chance to earn money. And I think if the promoter is the team manager, there's always a temptation to either take an easy way out, take a way out to save money, and not pick someone for it. Mm-hmm. Like say you had a choice between 3 riders, and you know that one rider is getting X per point, and another rider is getting X plus per point. There is always that temptation to go for the cheaper one to save yourself money. But more important, there is always the temptation for the rider to believe that's what you are doing. And your riders will come up to you if you're not careful and say, "Oh, you only gave it to him because it won't cost you as much money as me." So I've never, ever team managed as a professional team when I've been promoter as well.
Yeah.
So I had this with Colin. I said, I don't want to know, Colin, what any of them earn. Just don't tell me. So I will always make any judgments on whether you take a rider out of a race, whether you put him in a race. It will never, ever be governed by money. And I think that worked successfully. We had an absolutely great time together. We discussed everything beforehand. I went in there. The first meeting I did was a bank holiday. That they'd started the season very badly, and I went to the bank holiday, and I wasn't actually strictly involved then, but I just went to have a look. And then I started the following week, and after a couple of weeks, as I said to Colin, I think we've got to change the team, Colin, because there was one person within that team that I felt was not a bad apple, but I just felt he was hampering the entire team spirit. We made the change and things went up from there. We then won the league and I think the Craven Shield and possibly a Knockout Cup as well the following season. But we always had... Team spirit is something that is... very difficult. It's easy to have team spirit when you're winning. Like every team that wins a championship has got good team spirit. It's when you're losing, it's hard to have good team spirit. And I wouldn't say that you ever have good team spirit when you're losing. But what we had at Coventry was a really, really good mix. There were different characters, different personalities. Some would infuriate you, but then would produce the goods. Like Billy Gennaro was absolutely classic. That Billy was someone who would absolutely infuriate you on occasions, because he had so much ability, but his equipment wasn't usually that good. But he was just so good in the dressing room. He would have sort of the team in stitches in the dressing room before the meeting started. And you've always got to have that blend. You can't just literally have the 7 best riders, or the 7 riders that take you up to 49.99 when it's a 50-point limit. You've got to have the different personalities and the people who can pull it out for you when you really need it. The people who are ultra reliable, the people who will give 100%. You knew from people like Scott, Chris Harris, that they would never ever give anything less than 100%. And Bomber was particularly good at pulling out that extra special race. I can remember after I'd left Coventry to go back to Peterborough, that he, in the grand final, do you remember his big crash at Poole?
Yes.
And how he got up.
Yeah.
That must have totally inspired that Coventry team to see someone pick himself up from that and go out and win the rerun.
Yeah, and literally pull himself out the ambulance and get straight back on the bike.
Yeah. How could you not want to then win for him if you could see that? And they're the sort of characters and personalities you need. And I said, Billy Gennaro, he would fight your corner. Probably the strongest speedway rider I've ever met, with maybe one exception. You just knew that if you hit any bother, Billy would be the first that would be there to protect you. Mm-hmm. But as I said, infuriating at times, but worth it. Sometimes you have to have people who infuriate you. You can't pick a team of 7 great blokes that you all think are great and get on with, and they never query anything that anyone does. But yeah, I loved my time at Coventry, and had Peterborough, which was on my doorstep, had that not come along, and being asked to go back there, I certainly wouldn't have left Coventry.
And it's a shame that what's happened to Coventry since, though, isn't it? I mean, seeing it in the state that we do sometimes online, and I know there's the campaign to bring it back. Do you think that track will ever see the light of day again?
Personally, sadly, I don't. I just don't see. I think they are doing an amazing job. The Bring Back Coventry Bees group. They're working so hard. The trouble is that if a council refuses planning permission, the owners of the actual ground are just sitting on money. It's money in the bank, isn't it? And why should they? They always, I believe that the big developers always believe, and are usually right, that in time they will eventually get planning permission. And all that will have happened is that the land will have actually improved in value and will be worth more money than it was when they bought it. I hope I'm wrong. But we've seen it in so many places, haven't we? Mm-hmm. We saw it at Cradley. Cradley, one of the best supported clubs and tracks in the country, that closed down for housing. Oxford are fighting the same sort of battle. And who is going to come in and spend the sort of money that's needed to convert these into 2021-22 stadia?
It needs somebody with very deep pockets, doesn't it, ultimately?
Very deep pockets, doesn't it?
A very rich Speedway fan.
Yeah. Like as it happens, there is someone possibly in Coventry who would fit the bill. You is a Speedway fan, does have very deep pockets. And one can only hope that he does get the chance to actually buy it. But they're hard-headed, aren't they, these development company directors? They're not interested in Speedway, they're not interested in football, they're not interested in cricket, they're not interested in local environment, are they? All they're interested in is making money and putting up houses and saying, you look at Stoke. Stoke went just like that, didn't they? But who can blame them? That if the money isn't coming in from the stadium, it might be a bit different if they were earning 15,000, 20,000 a week from Speedway, but they're not going to earn that sort of money. I just hope that the efforts from people like Jeff Davis and David Rowe come to fruition, because they certainly deserve it. Coventry deserves Speedway. It's an absolutely criminal that Coventry hasn't got Speedway.
You're listening to Humans of Speedway. I'm Ian Brannan. In this episode, my guest is Peter Oakes, who's spent an entire lifetime in Speedway, really, going right back to the 1950s, as we've heard. But now on to his next challenge. We call it Speedway Paradise, and so it's kind of like Desert Island Discs, but with a bit more shale.
And I like that, Ian. Yeah,
I just came up with that there and then. I thought,
very good.
I don't know why I haven't been saying that for the last 6 weeks.
I can see why you're a professional.
Well, I'm just getting away with it for a prolonged amount of time, I think, is as we all are. So you're going to host a virtual Speedway event then. We're going to start by asking you which track you would choose to race on. This is irrespective of all of the facilities. So we're basing it purely on the shape and the shale.
On the shape and the shale.
Where we're going to go.
Am I allowed to have 2 tracks?
Well, why not? Why not?
Well, what I'd have is certainly the old Bellevue, Hyde Road. Best track I've ever seen in Britain. 420 yards, which gives me the facility to have a smaller track inside.
Oh.
And I would go for a Californian track called San Bernardino. I went over to America I think it was for a World Team Cup final at Long Beach. And in the week, I went to San Bernardino, which was probably 160, 180 yards, something like that. And I can honestly say I have never, ever seen racing as exciting and close as I did that night at San Bernardino. I don't know whether it was a rarity or whether that was the way it was. So I'd certainly like to put this little San Bernardino track inside the old Hyde Road.
Wow.
And that would be then the absolute 2 dream circuits for excitement, skill, sheer entertainment. 2 15 heat meetings.
Got you.
And what also are great, you've got the near quarter of a mile of Bellevue, and then you've got this little technical tricky track. You add the points up on aggregate and get the winner at the end of that.
Wow. So you're sorting out the small track men from the big track men in one go?
Yep.
Got
yeah,
you.
It would.
Okay, so which stadium would go around the edge of these tracks then? Because it sounds like a fantastic idea. Based on the facilities, atmosphere, places you've been to in your time. I mean, it may not be standing anymore, but which stadium are we going for?
Has to be Wembley, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, plus the old Wembley, the Twin Towers Wembley. The only drawback about Wembley was the track wasn't very good. So we've already covered that. So we've now got the 2 perfect tracks and the perfect stadium. I can remember I was fortunate enough to spend a lot of world finals in the pits at Wembley, and to hear the roar of that Wembley crowd when the riders went out on parade was something you could never ever forget. I was privileged to be very heavily involved in the 1981 World Final, the last World Final we had at Wembley, and while the stadium itself was probably coming towards the end of its life, wasn't it? A little worse for wear, but it was such a magical venue. It's why everyone still talks about Wembley today, isn't it? That when you consider it's nearly 40 years since the last Speedway meeting at Wembley, and everyone still talks about Wembley. Riders who were there still talk about Wembley. riders who weren't there say, I never rode at Wembley, but
Yeah.
Fantastic place. The best place in the world.
Now, moving on to the people who are going to take part in this meeting then, riding 2 meetings in one. Your all-time 1 to 7. Now, this can be any rider from any era, alive or sadly no longer with us. No points limits involved or anything like that. And obviously, it is just a home meeting, so I suspect Ivan might be involved. But over to you.
I think you're right on that Ivan has to be, number one, doesn't he? That his record just proves itself, and that anyone who can win 6 world titles on a one-off basis, frightening how many he might have won on a Grand Prix basis. Number 2, I'd go for Ty Wuffenden. I have an involvement with Ty, and but I do believe that if anyone is capable of surpassing the 6 world titles that Ivan and Tony Rickardson have, it has got to be Ty. He's already got 3. He's a young man. As long as he retains his hunger, and I think that's the most important thing. If he retains his hunger, he can certainly win 6, 7 world titles, I think, over time. He's as good as any rider I've ever seen. His mentality is so good. He's a rarity in some ways that he is just so laid back as well. He will stop, he'll talk to you during a meeting. Majority of riders at a world final are a bit insular and keep within themselves. But Ty, I think the typical example of Ty wasn't it, when he had that crash in 2017? Mm-hmm. Was it 2018? If you remember, in the final round of the GP, he came back into the pits and, totally unfazed and cracking jokes.
Yeah.
And saying things like, you have to give him a bit of a show and stuff like that.
And you worked on his on the book as well, didn't you?
Yeah, did the his autobiography with him, which again is super to deal with. If he said he'd be somewhere, if he said to call him at such a time, he was always there, very professional in that way. Never one who would, who you'd ring and then he'd say, I'm sorry, I forgot, or anything like that. Totally professional in our dealings. Hard worker, workaholic in many ways. Can't sit still, has got to be doing something. Whether that sort of renovating the house, working in the gardens, or getting ready for his speedway meetings.
Hard work pays off, doesn't it?
Yes.
So we've got Ivan Mauger and Ty Wuffenden, first 2 names on the sheet. It's looking good so far. Who's at 3?
Well, I have to say that my whole team is world champions.
Wow.
I've not gone for the person who, the extrovert who isn't quite as good, because I think if you've got no points limit, you've got to literally go for the riders who will score you the most points.
Yeah.
And I don't think any of these need anyone else in them. I'd have to say Barry Briggs. Barry again, never totally different personality to Ivan. I probably know Brigo better now than I did then, because, I suppose being in Ivan's camp, there was always that little bit of maybe an edge that you couldn't really, totally relax. But since retirement, I've got to know Brigo very well. We still speak sort of quite regularly. On the phone about different things, not usually Speedway. It's usually about other things that he'll tell me what he's been doing, and do I know where I can find such and such, and how he can speak to the the chief executive of Wembley and stuff like that. He's a super bloke and super character, super rider. Again, he was one of the the big 4 when they were all handicapped. You couldn't not include him in your top 7. He was such a personality in his own right, and a sporting personality. Even today, if you talk to people of sort of probably my generation and maybe a little bit younger, they all have heard of Barry Briggs, haven't they?
Oh, yeah, everybody's. I mean, and he's done that. He turns up at stadiums. I've seen him going around doing the Benevolent Fund collection with the buckets before.
Have you?
Yeah, at Sheffield, I think it was.
Yeah. But he's not only in Speedway.
Mm-hmm.
Like Brigo knew all the TV people. He's a great personal friend of Bernie Eccleston. He was a great personal friend of Harry Wheatcroft, who owned Donington Park. You know, he's a personal friend of Harry Redknapp. You know,
he's well connected.
He's so well connected, yeah, totally. And they know him as, you know, Brigo. And I've always said to him, I said, well, the greatest asset you had was the alliteration of your name. You know, the Barry Briggs is a name that's as easy to remember.
Yes.
But I'm sure it was a bit more than that, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think so. So that's 3 riders chosen in your all-time 1 to 7. Who is going to be at number 4 then, Peter?
Someone I didn't know that well when he was racing, and got to know him much better in his later days, and certainly since retired, Ovi Fundin, who won 5 World Finals. He was always appeared to have been a little bit aloof, and keep himself to himself. But he isn't, certainly since he's retired. He hasn't been that. He's always very open. I've actually written a piece with him in this week's Speedway Star, when he contacted me and sort of said, "Oh, can you do something? I'd like to talk about this." So I obviously rang him back, and we chatted away. And some of the stories he came out with were sort of amazing. He's so open with his own life, his personal life. Amazing person that he lives. He's got a house in the south of France near Saint-Tropez. And last Saturday, he actually got on his BMW motorbike and rode all the way to Sweden.
Wow.
And I think he's 87. He went on his own. He took his tent with him because he wasn't sure he could get accommodation because of lockdown and all those things, and rode all the way to Sweden.
You're as old as you feel, as I guess is the one saying.
Obviously. And when you talk to people like him and Brigo, you realise what extraordinary people they were. And you also get some inkling as to how they won world championships, because they do have a different outlook on life to people. Like, Brigo is the same. Brigo is still riding his trials bike up in the mountains in Southern California. He goes out regularly, and they're not more than pensioners, aren't they? They're veteran pioneers. So you can see they are very, very different sort of people.
Okay, who's at number 5 then? Right,
number 5. Coming up, I suppose a modern day rider, current rider. If the pandemic ends, Jason Crump. I'd known his dad, Phil, quite well. I did some work with Phil. I used to manage Phil for a couple of years during Phil's heyday, arranging his basically his German Continental Cross Track Speedway meeting. So I've known Jason literally since he was a baby, since a baby in nappies, and that I do mean that literally. That signed him then, when he was 16 to ride for us at Exeter. He really was a tremendous rider. You would have a fallout with Jason during a meeting. You would fall out with him, but you'd guarantee that the following morning he'd be on the phone. He'd say, "Hi boss, it's Jason. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that last night," and all forgotten. And you just knew that was his. One of the things he always said to when he was racing for us, and he said, "Never ever ask me if I want to go in heat 15. Tell me. It's your decision to take, your team manager's decision to take. Just tell me. Say you're in heat 15.
You can't argue with that, can you?
You can't. No, you can't. Relatively easy to do a deal with. There were quite a few riders who you would do a deal with at the beginning of the season, and no matter what happened, they would never ever come back and say, "Oh, this, that, the other has happened. I want more money." Jason was one of those. Like another one who isn't in my team, but was a super guy to deal with on that basis, Mick Poole. They just accepted, once they'd done the deal, if they smashed up 5 bikes in a row, that was down to them. Nothing to do with the promoter. They would always get on with it. And there were a lot of riders who were the opposite. Like, I've known riders, not necessarily who've ridden for me, but there was one famous Scandinavian rider who was known as someone who would never ever stick to his deal, would always hold the promoter to ransom at some stage in the season, threatened not to ride, threatened to down tools. And when you go back and look at this rider's particular record, you can see why he changed clubs almost every year, because promoters just literally had enough of him. Promoters, by and large, don't renege on their deals with a rider, and I think it's incumbent on riders not to renege on their deals with the promoter. He'd have his little flare-ups and his bursts on an actual meeting, but I think that was just the adrenaline. Really,
that just shows you care as well, I think, doesn't it?
Yeah. And Jason's sort of someone else that we sort of still keep in touch with, still talk to each other quite regularly, and managed to keep his secret for him for about a month that he was coming back to England.
Yes, I know, and we hope that happens in some form or another.
Yeah, he's still keen to do it. He still wants to do it. There's no doubt about that. We just hope that he gets the opportunity.
Absolutely. 2 places left in your team then. Who's next?
Greg Hancock. How can you not include someone who's ridden for so long?
I was going to say, there's an entire generation of people who have not known a world of Speedway or indeed Speedway Grand Prix without him being involved.
Well, no, they certainly haven't known Speedway Grand Prix without him being involved, have they? Because, okay, he wasn't involved last year, but that was only through, sadly, the illness that sort of Jenny had. But he was, if you remember, he was actually named in the Grand Prix lineup both last year and this year.
Yeah.
Until he felt he needed to withdraw. Like he's just like a 30-year-old, isn't he? A 29-year-old. It's almost unfathomable that at 50 he can still be racing and can still have the enthusiasm for it. I always remember, again, going back to Ivan, that he always said to me, he said, I could carry on racing till I'm 50, but I couldn't carry on with everything else involved. I couldn't carry on with the travel, with the late nights, with all. He said that is the side that stops you riding till you're 50.
Yeah.
But Greg has overcome all that, and to win world titles so far apart. What was it? He won 95, 96, was it his first one?
I think so, yeah.
And his last one, certainly 20 years, nearly more than 20 years apart, wasn't it? That is absolutely unbelievable, isn't it? In any sport, it's unbelievable.
And then to win it then so soon after that as well.
Yeah, to keep winning it and still to be at that level. And I'm sure that if Greg decided he wants to make a comeback next year, he'd still be at that same level. He's a nice bloke. He's very but he's very young, isn't he, at heart? He is still on totally the same wavelength as teenagers, and with 20-year-olds, he speaks the same language of them without looking stupid, like most of us. If we say, "Oh, you're wicked," and stuff like that, people look at you and say, "What's this old bloody man doing, trying to pretend he's a teenager?"
Yeah, he's certainly cooler than me now.
Yeah, he's cooler than us all, isn't he? It
was 97, 2011, 2014 and 2016.
So 97 to 2011.
14 years.
It's a long, long time, isn't it?
I mean, some riders have started their careers and ended it in less time than that.
Yeah. Well, you look how many riders must have retired during Greg's career.
Oh, Hundreds.
It's got to be, hasn't it? Literally, it has to be hundreds.
Yeah.
Like, there are riders who weren't born when Greg was racing in a world final.
Well, indeed, yeah. I mean, there's riders riding now who have, they were born 2003, 2004.
Yeah.
Must be.
Yeah. He's another one who treats everybody the same, irrespective of their age. He isn't condescending towards young people. He will take young people on board. If he thinks young people can do a job, he will employ them. He's just got no age. He hasn't got an ageism gene in his body. And that's probably why he's been so successful for so long. And he's such a bloody nice bloke. He's, again, I've had more dealings with him probably over the last 2 years, say, than perhaps the whole of his career. By that I mean speaking to him more regularly, because we were sort of involved on talking about something, and I did a lot of early features this year, with him. And he's another one who says, if you WhatsApp him at 3:00 our time on next Thursday afternoon, that when you call at 3:00 next Thursday afternoon, he will answer.
Mm-hmm.
If he doesn't, he will immediately send you a message. Oh, sorry, could you ring me in half an hour? Or we'll ring you back in half an hour. There are an awful lot of people who don't do that. There are lots of people, aren't there, who you arrange to talk to, and then they're not there for one reason or another. But Greg always seems to be there.
It must make it a lot easier for you being a journalist when you're trying to track these people down as well, because I guess, to know that you've got someone like Greg that you can pick up the phone to and arrange to talk to, and it's not going to be a hassle, must make your job a lot easier as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Because the big thing about being sort of a journalist, particularly working for national newspapers, is that you, by and large, the big names mean something to the sports editors and the sports staff. I can almost guarantee I will get a story in a national newspaper about Ty Buffington, simply because they've heard of Ty Buffington, and equally, the way they've heard of Greg Hancock. Mm-hmm. And then this year, the pandemic has been strange because it's been the easiest time there has ever been to actually speak to riders.
Yes,
because they're not on aeroplanes. At the moment they're all in Poland on lockdown. So by and large, you can get them. If you ring them, they will answer because they're in the one place. They're not deciding they've got to get up at 3:00 in the morning to get a flight from Wrocław back to Stansted, and then tomorrow they're back off to Sweden. So it's been a real buzz for journalists, and I would imagine it applies to any other sport except football. Like football, obviously, you never ever speak to a footballer these days as a journalist. But Speedway, you always do.
So you've got one slot left, one world champion left.
Yeah, I've got one world champion left, and again, there is a story behind this. It's Peter Craven. I saw him quite regularly at Bellevue during the early 60s until his death. So it's not that I didn't see him. I certainly didn't see him at Liverpool because, they got rid of him when he was still in his teens. Obviously, Frank McLean, who I've spoken about, he told me all sorts of things about him. He was spectacular, crowd pleaser, lovely guy, again, friendly, great with the fans. You just wonder what he might have achieved if he hadn't been killed in 63, because he was a two-time world champion. He just lost his world title, hadn't he, in 60 when he had that accident at Edinburgh at the Old Meadowbank. So I have to include him because he is the link to all my Speedway.
Yeah, absolutely.
Without sort of Peter Craven, I don't know. Would I have got involved in Speedway? I don't really know.
And what I'm finding is that I think for everybody who I've spoken to on this, their involvement in Speedway has very much been in that way that, there's been a chance meeting with it in many respects. And, the love affair from then goes on. But I guess that's life, isn't it?
That's certainly Speedway life, Ian, isn't it? That you do either fall in love with the sport or you just don't. You hate the sport. You think it's absolutely boring and not worth going and watch. And I'm glad to say I don't think my love for the sport has ever dimmed. I'm not one of those who believes it was better in the old days. It wasn't. The racing today, is as good as it's ever been. On occasions, it's as bad as it's ever been. A really good speedway meeting is still something that I don't think you can get a better sporting experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with your sporting experience putting together here, then, so that's your team, your all-time 1 to 7: Ivan Mauger, Ty Woofenden, Barry Briggs, Ovi Fundin, Jason Crump, Greg Hancock, Peter Craven. Who's going to referee this?
Now, this might come as a surprise to you.
Mm-hmm.
It'll certainly come to a surprise as a lot of the riders. I know that most people so far have said Tony Steele.
Yeah.
And I certainly wouldn't argue with Tony Steele. But strangely enough, I would go for Frank Ebden. Frank had a reputation of being a real stickler, a rulebook man. And that is actually what I really loved about Frank Ebden. You knew what he was going to do. If he told you to sit still at the start as a rider, that if they didn't sit still at the start, he would exclude them.
Mm-hmm.
He would fine them. He was an absolute stick. He would go by the rule book all the time. But you knew that he would. He wouldn't bend the rules. He wouldn't favour someone because, like referees sometimes do. Oh, well, he was just a straight up and down sort of bloke. I don't know. Sometimes I'd prefer someone exactly what he's going to do, because you can never then go back and say, oh, you didn't say that.
At least you're dealing with the rule book then. You know, if it's in the rule book, you know what he's going to do.
He didn't make up the rules.
Yeah.
He just followed the rules. He did exactly what it said in the rule book. And he did exactly what he said to you. I think I was probably one of the few team managers. I don't think you'll get anyone else saying Frank Ebden as the referee. He would run the meeting quickly. You knew that the 2-minute buzzer would go on almost as soon as the race was over. He wouldn't sort of tolerate you saying, oh, I want another 5 minutes. Can we all have a cup of coffee? He was just so totally straight up and down. And I like people who are straight up and down, because you can't complain if they stick to it.
You know what you're getting.
Yeah, he would never tell you something to your face and then go against it or not follow it through.
Mm-hmm.
He was smart, he was intelligent. Despite what people think, I think he genuinely had a love of Speedway. A lot of people said, oh, he only goes there, gets to the track and wants to get home as quickly as possible. I don't believe that. I think Frank was a genuine Speedway fan. I think he was a sad loss when he stopped refereeing, because on occasions there are too many referees who just almost make up their decisions on the hoof. They haven't really thought them through, but Frank knew exactly what he was going to do. And you couldn't pull the wool over his eyes. It was never worth going on to Frank and trying to argue that he'd got the decision wrong, because you knew he would never, ever change his decision. He made the decision that he thought was right. Every referee, every team manager, every rider gets decisions on crashes wrong. You get different views, don't you? But you knew that Frank would make it for the simple reason he thought it was right.
And on the subject of the rule book, if you were to be permitted to change one rule, or maybe slightly more, depending, where would you start on that?
The first one I would do, which I've thought quite long and hard about it, is go back to the time when riders could touch the tapes and were only excluded if they actually broke them. And I would also, almost coupled with that, I would do away with all the rules that have over the years almost made team managers obsolete and redundant. I would just like to see a total free-for-all. You have your 7 riders and you put them wherever you want in the team. So that team managers then would have to use their skills and their knowledge. And the same with sort of things like tactical substitutes. None of this. Oh, you can use a tactical substitute, but only in heats A to F, and then in X to Y, not in G because he's in it. Straight open. If you wanted to put Ty Wuffenden at reserve, do it, and then it's up to the opposing team manager to combat that.
And it's kind of like what they do in Poland in a way, isn't it? They do have more flexibility to move the positions around a little bit more there.
Yeah. Why not? Why not be able to have a rider who is good? Same with gate positions. I'd do away with fixed gate positions. I know a lot of people will argue vehemently against that and say, well, no, this helps. But why shouldn't you be able to pick between your riders what gate position they go off? So that if you've got a really good gaiter who's good off the inside, let him go off the inside every race if you think that's to the advantage of your team.
Yeah, sure.
I believe that team managers should be I'm not going to say as important as, because that should never be the case, that riders are always going to be the most important people. But team managers should have more say on the results of meetings. Team managers, so if they get it wrong and they're not very good, the team will lose. If they get it right, then there's a possibility the team will win. Whereas today, team managers are almost redundant, aren't they? What do? Very little.
Yeah, just implement what little control they have, I suppose.
And their only argument is, the rule book says A, B, C and D. Just let's have a bloody free-for-all. It's like, could you imagine that? I don't know if there is any other sport where there is such a restriction. Like, you don't turn around at football and to Jurgen Klopp and say, you've got to play Jordan Henderson in midfield. If he wants to play him in goal, he can. Mm-hmm. You don't turn around in cricket and say that Joe Root has got to bat at number 3. If he wants to open the innings or wants to bat at number 8, he can.
It's a very good point. And the last question that I have for you is, who would be the opposition for your team of world champion all-stars? So this can be any team, assembled team from history. Who would you like to see at this dream meeting of yours? Yeah.
Well, other than going for a Liverpool team from 1940 or something, I would have to probably there's a choice, isn't there, between the best team ever, whether it was the Peter Adams Cradley Heath team or the Oxford team of, 1986? The Oxford team that were unbeaten. I would think I would have to go for the Oxford team because they did go through the season unbeaten. Okay, they didn't run two home matches, but there's absolutely no reason to think they wouldn't have won those final 2 home matches if the weather hadn't intervened. They were also joint holders, weren't they, of the Knockout Cup. So I think that one, led by Hans Nielsen, would have to be the best. They had, Hans and Simon Wigg. It wasn't probably man for man the best team that we've ever seen. Certainly the Cradley one would have to have been. But I think that Oxford team, under the rules, was probably the best team we have seen, because you can't argue against a team going unbeaten.
Absolutely not.
A team wins every league match that they race. How can you argue? That's got to be the best league team there has ever been, hasn't it? Obviously, it'd be easy. I could have picked another 7 riders and say, well, that would be the team to race against. You could use a Tony Rickardson and R.C. Ward. But if we're going for an actual team that there was, I'd go for that Oxford team.
Oxford 1986. Then that's the first time that's been suggested. I think Cradley has been mentioned in the past, but I think it's the first mention for Oxford. And you're right, it is such a great team. Obviously going unbeaten, but people like Hans Nielsen and Simon Wigg in that side. It's very strong.
To go unbeaten is amazing, isn't it? In a season.
It's been fantastic speaking with you, Peter. Thanks for spending the time, and it's been wonderful to hear all those stories, and hopefully we can all get back to a track and watch some new events in the future. Hopefully, not too long away from now.
Yep, let's hope so. And can I, while we're on, just wish you good fortune in the One Voice Awards?
Thank you very much.
It would be nice to have a Speedway fan winning one of those awards.
Thank you. Well, they have been delayed by everything because they
it's September now, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, you've done your research.
Yep.
Yeah, because I got nominated for a few. These are voiceover awards, and
5/6 awards was it this time?
I think it's 5. Yeah, you know more than me, Peter. 6. It might be 6. Yeah, it was 5 last year, 6 this year. Yeah. The thing is, I got nominated for 5 last year, but the only award I've ever won is the one for best outtake. So
I think you should. Why don't you play one of these outtakes on each of your podcasts?
Well, I could do that. We could start to open it up now that I've sort of tried to keep it prim and proper. Maybe that's what people want to hear.
I'd like to hear, what was it, an earwax one or something?
Yeah, it's about earwax.
Nominated this year?
Well, funnily enough, only yesterday, I did a voiceover for the same company. And the clip that was submitted was obviously probably a year old. Because of that was the time period for you to submit your work. So they came back yesterday. The good news is the people of Ipswich are still demanding their earwax removal treatment, and the good news is that they are about to reopen after the big closure. So good. And it did trip me up again.
I'll have to try and find it somewhere to listen to.
I'll dig it out and send you it. But it's definitely kicking around somewhere. But yeah, the good news is earwax. The earwax removal industry is back in business.
Glad to hear it. Yeah.
But thank you very much, and hopefully we can win some awards for Speedway podcasts in the future as well. That would be something I'd try and achieve.
Yeah, that would, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, we'll do our best.
Okay. Good to talk to you, and do stay safe.
And in case you're wondering, this is what Peter was on about. This is the kind of thing I get nominated for awards for. Award-winning hearing care and earwax removal. I didn't want you left wondering what we were talking about. So anyway, that's it. And that clip is nominated for a voiceover award later in the year. We will find out if we are victorious. Thanks to my guest Peter Oakes for joining me on this episode of Humans of Speedway. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast, give us a review as well, it's always welcome, and you can follow us on social media now too. We are at Speedway Humans on Twitter, and also search for Humans of Speedway on Facebook as well. We'll keep you up to date when new episodes are about to come and give you some preview clips on those social channels. And don't forget there's previous episodes you can catch as well, including with Nigel Pearson, Scott Nichols, Jeff Scott, and Neil Machin. Until next time, take care, stay safe, and we'll speak to you soon on Humans of Speedway.
Sports Social Podcast Network.
With Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to... Has anyone seen the bride and groom?
Sorry, we're here. We were getting lucky in the limo and we lost track of time.
No, Lucky Land Casino, with cash prizes that add up quicker than a guest registry.
In that case, I pronounce you lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Daily bonuses are waiting. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.